Justin, how are you? You're looking very well indeed.
Thank you. I am good. I have been doing a bit of training. I signed up to a sprint triathlon recently, so I started training for that. And I've not done running for a long time, and I'm rubbish at swimming. And I got a bit caught out with this actually because I got invited to some fancy lunch for people who speak about high performance stuff, and somebody had put a whole group together, and it was quite an interesting crowd. And I only knew one or two of these people, so I arrived at this thing, and I got sort of introduced to a couple of people I'd never met before. And somebody said to me straight away, have you made any New Year's resolutions? It was just sort of early January. And I said, well, it's not really a resolution, but, I'm doing this sprint triathlon. It's quite a big deal. I went on about having not run for ages and how rubbish I was at swimming. And, made it quite a big deal about all the training I was doing and blah, blah, blah. And then I said to these two guys, and what's your background? What's the context for you being here? The first one looked at me and he said, I ran 65 ultra marathons in 65 days.
I think I
I
know
sort
him.
of went, okay. And then I looked at the other guy and I said, what about you? And he said, I was in the swimming final of the Beijing Olympics. I was just like, oh, I'll get my coat. This isn't going very well for me.
Oh my goodness. Well, listen, you're still doing way better than I'm doing. I had so many resolutions at the start of the year in terms of fitness and this, that, and the other, and they've all fallen by the wayside. But anyway, we'll talk about that separately because I'm going to get some advice from you as to how to improve my performance. So let's go back a little bit because you're very interesting. You seem to have had sort of 15 different careers, starting at McDonald's, which is a very weird place to start, and then to end up in high performance and being a high demand consultant. How did you get from McDonald's to where you are now?
So that was a while ago, well researched. Yes, that was straight after school. I guess I have done lots of things. It probably falls into sort of three broad buckets or something. I was in the military for 12 years, and then I've had a sort of consulting, speaking, training business, and then I've had a little bit of time in global corporate as well. So the military bit, I was in the army first when I was 18 after McDonald's, in fact, literally just afterwards. And I had a great time there. And then I saw these people flying over in these planes and they looked super cool and they had nice warm cockpits. And I was sort of digging a hole in the ground or something. And they used to go and stay in a hotel at night. And it may or may not be of any relevance that Top Gun came out about this time. But I changed track to the Air Force. And I did 12 years in the Air Force, 6 years on a jet called the Tornado F3, a frontline fighter, which is now in the RAF Museum. And I took my kids there a little while ago. It was quite funny. I've got two young daughters. Not only had I flown the Tornado, I've flown the one that's in the museum. And I was saying to them, Daddy flew this plane. And they were, seriously, this is like my best ever audience. They were like super impressed. And then one of them looked at me and said, well, if you fly it, why is it in a museum? And I sort of thought about it for a minute. I was like, yeah, let's go now. We'll go look at something else. So I flew that, and then I did my last 3 years on the Red Arrows. I had about 250 displays where I was executive officer. So that was the military bit. And then I set up a consulting training business, not really with any sort of great vision or exit strategy or any of the things they teach you. It was more that I didn't really fancy commercial flying and I needed to do something. And so I set up this business around building high performance teams. I was thinking, well, how can I leverage sort of my previous experience and background? And started off doing some fairly straightforward workshops for conferences and management meetings. And over time, the breadth and depth of that grew. And we ended up working with Microsoft, with the United Nations, Mercedes F1. And then more recently, I had a consulting job that turned into staying on the payroll for a little while with a big global corporate L3 Harris, which was interesting for me because I think as a speaker, especially if you've done it all for a while, as I have done, it's quite easy to get into a bit of a sort of groove of you have absolute clarity on what your points are going to be. And, high performance isn't rocket science. It's A, B, and C, and you just need to do those things. And I think it was quite interesting for me and a little bit humbling and a learning experience to sit on the other side of the fence and realize that, yes, it is probably those things, and I'm not too far off. However, when you're in a big global corporate, it's not quite as easy as that. You've got all sorts of conflicting priorities, insufficient resources for all the tasks you've got people stuff going on, short-term stuff, financial, budgetary stuff. And so it was a good learning point for me, I think, to see that perspective on the other side of the fence.
I think that's really good. I think every speaker should go and do, 6 months or a year in a corporate to understand the other if they haven't done it before. I think that's really excellent. I
Yeah.
love the fact that, I mean, I love the Top Gun story. That was brilliant. I remember when Top Gun came out, and I'm looking forward to, because there's going to be a sequel, isn't there? Goodness knows what
Yes.
Tom Cruise is going to look like now, but hey, how cool.
I
Um,
may I may have watched every trailer for it.
Oh, have you? Right. Excellent. I shall catch up. So tell me, what the other thing I think is really great about you is that you have actually lived and breathed high performance. So you don't talk about it. You've actually been part of a world-class high performing team. Do you think that helps you with regards to your speaking?
So clearly, I'm going to say yes. But I do believe that. I think that I've spent a little bit of time doing some study as an adult and a couple of masters. And if you talk to academics or even sort of public intellectual types, they would strongly argue that the distance from the action helps them. So they've got a much wider, more strategic perspective, and they're independent and objective. They haven't been in the thick of it, so they can see things for what they are without the biases maybe of somebody who's in the thick of it. And so I can broadly buy that argument, and it makes sense. I think my caveat to it, though, is that if you're talking about leadership and high performance and performance under pressure, these are practices, not theories. I mean, you wouldn't want to go for an operation and be operated on by a doctor who'd only been taught the theory of it. And I think it's true of these more sort of abstract concepts like leadership and high performance, that you can learn quite a bit in the classroom, and you can learn quite a bit, just from studying. However, to really get it and get the challenges in sort of making decisions that have high consequences under a lot of pressure, or leadership sort of ethical and moral dilemmas, I think you have to have lived it to a certain degree. So for me, I kind of feel I've lived some of those things, albeit quite a while ago, and then I've had the chance to reflect, consult, work on them in a different context. So yeah, I would argue that having a foot in both camps is a good thing.
That makes total sense to me. I like that. That's great. That's really good. And I mean, the piece I like about your 15 various different careers, I have to be honest, the bit that I love is the red arrows bit. It's the bit that I get most excited about. And I'm sure you probably find that irritating, because I suspect all of us want to hear about red arrows. We all admire them because it's something so distant from what we can do, but we've all seen them, right? What did
Mm.
you learn from that experience of leading the red arrows, and how has that influenced your work?
It's funny your comment there, almost sort of apologising for asking about that, because people do that with me quite a bit. It's like, you've probably had a million questions. I hope you don't mind. Whereas actually, I see it almost the opposite way around. I think I'm very lucky to have had a chance to have done something that quite a lot of people are genuinely interested in. So, I can take questions all day long. In terms of what I got out for it, or what I learned, I think there's a couple of different lenses here. That there's stuff that I clearly must have learned because they've been a key part of my work since, and it's the stuff that sort of clients are interested in. And then there's what I actually personally got out of it. And what other people are interested in, one theme that they latch onto a lot, which has definitely influenced me as well, is this idea of the red arrows changing 3 people a year. So you have a team of about 100 people. The front end of that team is the 9 display pilots. Each year, of the 9 display pilots, the 3 most experienced pilots leave, and the remaining 6 change their job, change their position in the team. So just think about that. At some level, that is the most stupid system. I mean, only the military could think of this. It's massively inefficient. Clearly, there are some good reasons why they do that, to do with career progression, bringing in some fresh blood. There are some operational reasons why it actually works quite well in practice. But the interesting thing, I think, is the display each year is just about always considered to be world class. The team's output, even though it's a different team. So it doesn't depend on 1 or 2 stars. This has been reproducible for a very long time. And it's almost like it's been bottled. There's something in the culture, the behavior, the process, the how we do business around here that's reproducible. So I think that's been a very powerful learning for me. And it sort of influences some of the work that I do about, how do you embed a way of doing business? And it could be like a safety culture. It could be a highly objective way of doing business, could be a high performance. And I think it always boils down to those things about the right environment, which kind of means culture, the right attitudes of people and individuals, and then the right processes. So that's been quite powerful for me in lots of ways. In terms of what I got out of it, people always say to me, it must have been a dream job, and clearly it was in many ways a dream job. But I didn't really see this at the time because, like anything, when you're doing it, it becomes your job. You get in, you get selected. You're like, oh my god, I can't believe it! It's so exciting. And then you start doing it, and reality strikes, and you realise it's going to be quite hard if you didn't know that already. And then after a while, although you still always know that you're quite lucky and this is a great job, it does become your norm. You normalise it. You go to work every day. And it's only when I look back on it that I kind of reflected on what was it that made that job so rewarding. And I think it boils down to two things. One is it's a stretch experience every day. There's not many environments, I don't think, where you genuinely have a stretch experience, as opposed to sort of business as usual and multiple pressures. Those things happen in the Red Arrow as business as usual and normal meetings. But 3 times a day in training, every day you go flying. And that's always a stretch experience. Even by your 3rd year, when you can more or less do it, it will bite you. You still have to be on your game. And then the other side of it is that you always get feedback. So we have a debrief straight afterwards. We might talk about it. And again, it's not that easy when you're in the thick of it, especially in your 1st year, when the debrief points generally go towards the 1st-year pilots who've got the most to learn. But so when I reflect on it, I can see that stretch experience followed by instant feedback to then go and do it again and improve is actually very rewarding. It doesn't feel like it in the moment, but then a few months down the road, you look back and the progress has been amazing. And I think that sort of very short feedback loop is a very powerful thing. And I got to admit, it's quite difficult to reproduce in lots of other environments, but I think anything you can do along those lines is very rewarding to people.
I think that's really interesting because many of the high performers that I've interviewed who have been, top athletes, top performers in whatever background, talk about the importance of this feedback. And you're talking about that short feedback loop, that immediate feedback where you review. And I think you're right that you then see that progression. It's really rewarding. I love the fact that you talk about stretch, that you're being stretched, because I think that's important as well, that you don't stagnate, that you are constantly challenged. And the fact that 3 people change every year, I mean, that's incredible. I think it's great in a way, if you're in that 9, you're going to get a chance to be in the top 3, to change role and to keep moving around. So I think in a way that's exciting to be in that position that it's going to change and you're going to be stretched and challenged. And I think we need to do more of that in business, where we move people around and stretch them and challenge them. Yeah. Also, so there's flexibility.
It is quite commercially inefficient, and I get that. And so it's more difficult to justify in a sort of pure commercial operation. It's quite rewarding for the individuals, I think. But I saw a nice example with Michael Bloomberg when he became mayor of New York. Before he had to step aside from Bloomberg, and he knew for a year or more that he was going to be the mayor. He'd already been voted in, and so for his last year, he rotated all his top execs around the different jobs, so they'd all have a sort of broad cross-functional level of competence across the whole organisation. And on the debrief one, I spoke at a conference once with Seb Coe, with Lord Coe, and he was talking to me afterwards about some of his experiences, and he had the same view, and he said, I can't understand why people don't want that feedback. He said, every time I was running, I wanted to know what people thought. He said, the person who had the contrarian opinion or the different opinion, that's the one I was most interested in. Do they know something that can help me improve here?
Yeah, no, fantastic, really valuable. So tell me though, with your background in the military, has it ever worked against you?
It can do a little bit. People have preconceptions about the military, and they can't help that. It's whatever influences they've been exposed to. And so yes, sometimes if those preconceptions are at the negative end, they will tend to be about being very male dominated, macho. Words like command and control might come up. And so people have this image, I think, sometimes that that's the only thing and that the military is this sort of very narrow organization, and that's what and therefore you might not be very comfortable in their organization, which is really diverse and flexible. And of course, the military has changed massively over the years. Some of those things were almost certainly true at some point, but it is a fast-moving organization. There's difficult, complicated things. And so it also has had to move with the times. And its diversity will more or less, or should more or less mirror the population. It has been a bit of a catch-up for them on that front. But I think the idea that, I can only cope or work with sort of, British male people or audience or something. It seems so ridiculous. I've got two daughters. I work with loads of people, very different contexts. I've worked with the United Nations. So yes, it can be an issue. And I say the other side is also true. Some people have a very positive perspective, which will play to my advantage. But just coming back to the comment there about diversity, it's interesting. Obviously, that's very much a theme of the moment. And I think that's a very relevant theme, not just sort of for diversity for its own sake, but where it should be of most relevance to organizations, other than simply doing the right thing, is how it drives performance. And what we're really talking about there in my mind is cognitive diversity. And the military are actually quite good at this. Now, when you talk about diversity, you can't change all your workforce and say, we should have a more diverse workforce, therefore we'll get rid of everybody here and we'll change to a different workforce. But what you can do is employ certain processes in order to leverage the cognitive diversity of the people you've got a lot more effectively. So that's become quite a big theme for me. And it's something that I think the military are pretty good at. And it's an area I've done quite a lot of work with in more recent years about how do we get around the intrinsic biases we have in our thinking such that we make better decisions, such that we get better performance outcomes. So, coming back to your question, it had some pros and cons for me, but I think there are some quite powerful tools that you're able to take from that world that, that inform my thinking and work now very effectively.
Excellent. And you're so right. The intrinsic biases are so important to tackle, and sort of that cognitive diversity, so important. So that's really good. I'm sure you'll probably get asked to speak about that regularly. So here's a difficult question, because I don't want you to have too easy a time. If you had to choose one factor, what do you think is the most important thing when it comes to driving high performance?
So I think the easy answer to this is people. It's always people, and you can't argue with that. People, leadership, organizational culture, which are all people issues. And I think that that's such an easy answer, and everyone would give it. So I wouldn't argue with that, but I almost regard that as a prerequisite. There's some people issues that you simply have to address. If we were going to go for something beyond that, I think it would be what I like to call a better understanding of reality. That what I've come to realize a lot is, and it comes back to a previous little conversation about diversity, is that a lot of the decisions that get made are rubbish. And so the performance outcome can't be that great if we're not making the best decision on the best interpretation of the facts. Now, if you're doing something that's got you've got a perfect data for it, it's fairly straightforward, then you should be able to make a good decision about it. But the bigger your organization is and the more senior you are, people are often making decisions under fairly high ambiguity. There is stuff they don't know, there is stuff they can't know, they've got imperfect information, they haven't got enough time to rationalize it properly. And so the ability to sort of get this, what's our best understanding of reality? How do we stress test our assumptions and our knowledge to get the best possible set of knowledge that we can in order to inform this decision and make the most objective decision we can? And then the other end of that same process is how do we learn as effectively as we can? So it's all very well, as we were just talking about debriefing, that's a good idea, get feedback, get better at this stuff. But actually, it's quite easy to debrief and learn nothing or learn the wrong things. And in the same way that when we're planning and making decisions, we can be faced with a lot of ambiguity, often the learning isn't blindingly obvious either, but what the right learning is. So it's the ability to have this sort of truly objective, honest, transparent conversation to stress test the thinking and try and get again to our best understanding of reality. What do we think really happened there? What do we think the real cause and effect was? What should we learn from that for next time? And in terms of making those things happen, it's absolutely back to my first point when we started talking about the environment, the behaviours, the attitudes, and the process. That the single most important thing here is the right environment. So people have often said to me, "Well, I get that. It sounds quite powerful. We don't normally debrief that as honestly as you're talking. How do we make that happen?" And I think the start point for this is it has to be led by example. That it's all about senior people holding their hand up saying they didn't get some things right, and it sets the tone for everybody else. It makes it possible to have the real conversation. It illustrates a simple point: the boss can get it wrong. The boss may not know that he or she got it wrong, so other people have to be able to challenge. And this is a big, and I've had a few people come back to me on this, senior execs when I presented on it. And I think this is a very honest piece of feedback. It's only happened once or twice where somebody said, "I get that, I understand it, I can see the value, but I'm not quite sure that I could do it. That I'm not very comfortable about people critiquing my performance in front of everybody else. And actually, I think you have to respect that. That shows quite high self-awareness to be able to realize that that's what's going on in your head and be so honest about it. But the thing I say back to them is, what do you think they talk about when you leave the room? Yeah, everybody knows what happened, and if it's you that made the mistake, they already know, and they're having that conversation in private. Wouldn't it be better to have it in public and learn from it? And I think this sort of fear that it might be a credibility destroying event, it's the opposite. The act of disclosure is very powerful. It buys you a lot of credibility.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. What are they talking about when you're not there? Yeah, that's very good. A bit of FOMO there. Yeah, I like that.
Yes.
I don't know if
I mean, my challenge to people on that, Maria, is to if you don't believe me or you're a bit uncomfortable, is go and try it. Go lead by example. Hold your hand up. Tell them, tell the team it was your fault, and you'll take the hit. And see what write to me on LinkedIn. Tell me what sort of reaction you get.
Interesting. Okay, cool. I often have to say it's my fault because I make more mistakes than anybody else. So anyway, so let's not talk about that. But it's interesting because I wasn't expecting that answer. I thought you were going to say to me the most important driver of performance, of high performance, is Simon Sinek's start with why. What's our purpose? And you didn't come up with that. So tell me about that.
So Sinek is clearly, successful, bright, very well respected, has a sort of global reputation as a speaker. So there's obviously something in what he's promoting there, and I wouldn't argue with that. But I don't agree that it's the whole story. I think it's quite a long way from being the whole story. So would we like to work for an organization that has great purpose, that you really buy into and believe? 100%. Why wouldn't you? I mean, one of the most impressive organizations I'd seen in this context was when I did a speaking engagement for Comic Relief, and I went out with them all that night. And the amount of positivity and engagement from the people in the organization about what they do was absolutely inspiring. That is clearly a good thing. But I think the reality is that, not everybody gets the opportunities to be in a business that's saving the world or as, trying to make a meaningful contribution in that sense. And actually, it's not everybody's driver. So if I look back to my time flying, the raison d'etre of the Red Arrows was something about public relations, recruitment, those sort of things. And so, that's the reason the team was funded and does the job that it does. How important was that to me? Not very. I get selected for this job. I go to work. I go flying every day. My sort of logic is I get to do this really cool stretch experience, and then I've got to get to play with all these amazing toys, and you're going to pay me for it as well. I'm in. And the higher purpose is almost irrelevant to me. And I think that's I was going to say it's quite common. I don't think it's uncommon. So, you look at the other thing that I've seen Sinek talk about, and I've seen this video played a lot at conferences, is that some of the most successful businesses in the world are as successful as they are because they have such a strong sense of purpose. And that's why customers engage with them. I simply don't believe that. Customers like the idea, for sure, that they would engage with organizations with great purpose. But they engage with lots of organizations that don't have any obvious, deeper purpose for very different reasons. Why do we shop on Amazon? I'm not sort of pointing at Amazon as anywhere particular on this scale, but I would argue it's because of utility and price. They can get stuff to me the next day or even the same day at a very competitive price. Do I deeply understand their organizational values? And if I did, would they be a deep sense of purpose? I don't know. But people are still very happy working in those organizations because if you're a techie, you get to play in an organization that's solving big technical challenges with huge resources available to you, and it's really exciting. So I think it's important to separate out this issue, the intrinsic motivation, the task, what drives me personally, and the extrinsic motivation for something that's a bit bigger. And obviously, you'd like to have both. But I just think that Sinek only tells part of the story on this. That the extrinsic motivation can be the most powerful thing, for sure. But it's definitely not the whole story by a long way.
You're making me think now. You're making me think deeply. Thank you for that. We've covered lots of ground. You can clearly speak about so many different topics, not just high performance, but so many different areas. What's the sweet spot for you? What do you think is the area that you give the most value on?
So I clearly need to be careful here, shooting myself in the foot. I don't want to discount anything. I think, for me, it's been a journey. I started off doing the high performance teams bit, and it sort of developed into more about high performance organizations. And people still ask me to talk about that, and effectively to do a case study presentation on the red arrows. So that has remained for me quite a signature piece for a long time. What has become more of a thing for me in recent years is the stuff we were just talking about decision making under ambiguity. So I've become very interested in that field. I think partly because I looked back, it probably was driven by some client inquiry or request at some point, that I look back on my military experience and think, actually, we used to make quite good decisions most of the time in the aircraft itself in quite stressful, demanding environments. How did we do that? Because we tend to get it, more, you don't get it exactly right, but you get it more or less right most of the time, otherwise it wouldn't work. And it led me to reflect quite deeply on that. And then I started doing some other work related to that with a guy called Mark Bergman at Imperial College, who's very good on this. So I would say that's become quite a thing for me, this area of decision-making under ambiguity. I'm really passionate about it. It ties in with a lot of the things we talked about the right environment, to be really objective, the quality of debrief, the quality of decision-making. And then I guess the other one that has become a bit of a theme, certainly was for the last 18 months or so, was about virtual or hybrid teams. How do they work? And I think maybe the best insight I got from that was from a client I worked with at Microsoft, who's quite senior. He gave me permission to quote him on this. And it was right in the middle of the worst of the COVID stuff. And I asked him how it's all going for him. And I kind of think, you guys make teams, you must be quite good at this. And he said, yeah, absolutely. He said, we'd like to think we're quite good at using it. However, he said, we'd still, go for face-to-face meetings at the drop of a hat, jump on a plane or whatever. And he said what he'd realized is, or what his opinion was, that the things that drive high performance were broadly unchanged. It's just that you had to achieve those things leaning through a little window on a screen like we're doing now, which is much more difficult. And certainly for me, I have a bit of a mantra about performance, about clarity, alignment, empowerment as three big drivers of high performance. And I think you can get away with a lot about clarity and alignment if you're meeting every day, if you're chatting at the water cooler, if you're having lunch, if something's not completely clear, you're often just checking in all the time and having these conversations. Whereas if you're working at home for 80% of the time and you're only checking in, occasionally, you'll get sort of much more exposed if you don't get these things right. So that was kind of a long answer. I think the high performance teams thing is still my thing. I guess my personal sort of passion at the moment is the decision making or ambiguity. The glue that joins pretty much all the work together is this thing about building high performance cultures.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. What do you do outside of speaking? Because I know you do other things too. What are you up to?
I have 2 young kids. It's quite time consuming. I go kite surfing. I'm training for a triathlon, as I mentioned. I got embarrassed about. I have a few entrepreneurial projects and fingers in a few other pies, and one of which is we're fundraising for at the moment, a project Net Zero Nitrogen, which in short is about replacing synthetic nitrogen fertilizer with a naturally occurring safe bacterium. And this is a big deal. 6 months ago, a year ago, I probably didn't realize that fertilizer was bad for the world, and it broadly is. It only has about 30% efficacy. The rest of it, or 30 to 50%, the rest of it actually goes into the water course as nitrate pollution or into the air as nitrous oxide, which broadly makes carbon dioxide look like a health fad. And so I'm working with some scientists on a naturally occurring replacement for that. So we're just fundraising at the moment, which that is a whole new experience for me as well. I've never been out cap in hand before asking funds for money.
That's really important, actually. That's a really important, that event, that organization has a huge purpose, and actually really, doesn't it? So that's fantastic.
Yes.
Brilliant.
So
wish you the best.
Slightly ironic given what I was saying before, because actually the purpose of that is one of the drivers for me. There's not many things that cross your radar, I don't think, that are both, have that really strong sense of purpose and actually have sort of a really attractive commercial proposition as well.
Yeah.
And it's the combination of those things that makes it so powerful and so attractive.
Brilliant. Love that. So finally, I'm going to let you go, but I have to know, you've been on what we call the speaker circuit in Bureau land. You've been on the speaker circuit for over 15 years. Obviously, you started as a child. What's been the secret to that longevity? How have you kept going?
So I think it just evolves over time. That at one point I was younger, childlike, as you say, And so, my experience was probably more current then. And, I just finished coming out of the military and that sort of environment. But I possibly lacked a bit of polish and the depth of insight that I would like to think that I have now, and the depth of experience. So I think I've probably moved camps a little bit from being sort of very current in something and, fresh out of it, to not being as current, but having, I think a higher quality insight maybe. There's definitely a sort of couple of key learnings for me on that journey. I think the first one for me really was about how to be any good at it. And I'm not saying I'm by any stretch perfect, it's a constant learning experience. But I engaged a lady called Bridget Bryce, who was an actress who worked as a coach for sort of presenting and speaking. And she was very perceptive. And I sent her a VHS video. Shows you how long ago it was when I was a child. And she looked at it, and bear in mind, I'd never met her before the first meeting. And when I first met her, she said, "Yeah, I looked at the video. I bet you don't give much away in relationships, do you?" And I was like, who have you been talking to? This is a bit weird. But she was very perceptive. And what she'd realized that, I was quite clinical in my approach. I was technically quite competent, but lacked that sort of passion in the moment. And so I think that's the one thing that I really got from her is to be in the moment. Try and deliver to like 1,000 people the same way you deliver to your friend in the pub. And so that's a long journey to it. It's like that point about the practice versus the theory. It's easy to understand. It's quite difficult to get to that stage. And then the other one for me which has been a challenge actually is probably about personal branding. We've talked about this before, the X versus the expert. That I think being an expert has better longevity than being an X. An X is only current for quite a while. I think when I first started, I heavily marketed myself as an X because that's what I was. But because I did that, I then sort of, through my own work, became positioned as such. And so I'd like to think, I wouldn't go around calling myself an expert in anything in particular, but I'd like to think I have a far wider breadth of experience now than an X. However, I'm still sort of picking up the pieces, I think, from having marketed myself as an X for quite a long time. But it seems to work.
You're doing fine, and I think anybody who's listened to this podcast will realize how much expertise you really have and how much value you can bring. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. I hope it's been like talking to somebody down the pub for you.
It was one person. It was easy. Thank you very much. You made it very easy. Thank you.
Super. And thank you everybody for listening to The Speaker Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. You can keep up with future episodes on the Speakers Associates website, which is speakersassociates.com, or your favorite podcast app. And if you would like to invite Justin to speak at your next conference or event, please contact Speakers Associates in plenty of time to book him so that you won't be disappointed. And I will see you all next week. Thank you for listening.